Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Chris Schoenwald. You can find out more about Chris and his work, The Passion Fashioned Presenter, at www.passionfp.com. And we're going to be talking about how you can overcome fear and using the tool of public speaking. Welcome, Chris Schoenwald.
Yes, hello. Yeah, thanks for having me on your show, Catherine. Really excited to be here.
Now, Chris, you probably know more about this than I do, but I understand that public speaking is the second biggest fear in the world after the number one, which is death, right?
Yeah, it's certainly something that gets a lot of people going, and typically not in good ways. Yeah, I was actually reading a stat a little while ago, put out by the National Institute of Mental Health, that said 75% of people suffer from speech anxiety. Right, that's a crazy number. That's a crazy stat there. So, yeah, it's certainly up there for something that gets people wired, no doubt.
Now, Chris Schoenwald, how can public speaking actually be good for us and for our health?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, I think, because not a lot of people necessarily connect the two up, right? Obviously, we know that public speaking creates stress, but how does this affect our health? Well, I think in considering this, first off, we need to acknowledge that first statistic, where that a lot of people suffer from this. And in creating a presentation and going through the presentation, there's several layers of potential stress-inducing, actions there. And if we know that this is something that's going to be getting us, completely wired, we need to find ways of handling the stress and pressure. Because one of the biggest things here is that stress, as you know, and probably as many of your listeners would know, it's not something that's limited to just one sphere of our life, right? So if we've got a big presentation coming up, chances are the stress is going to spill over into other aspects of our life. Maybe it's our home life. Maybe it's in our relationships with our colleagues. Maybe it's in relationships with our spouse, our children, so on and so forth. So I think understanding that, yes, stress is an issue and it is associated with public speaking, as we all know, but it's not limited to just that aspect. We really have to find good ways of dealing with this. Now, if we can, and if we're able to do so, that's going to be really helpful to us in a number of other respects. Anytime we're able to overcome any type of obstacle, what does that do for us, right? It gives us self-confidence. It gives us this jolt of, yes, I can do it. I can overcome. And those types of feelings lead to, a deeper sense of self-worth, and not only that, these types of feelings and techniques that we develop can be into other aspects of our life too, right? So it's not just related to public speaking. If we find a good way of coping with the stress, we can use it in some other manner, right? So I think in this sense, public speaking and all the stress that's associated with it can really be, a beneficial thing if we're able to find ways to overcome. And I hope and I believe that probably within this interview, we're going to cover these things today and allow people to hopefully move into that section whereby they're able to control this and turn it into a positive experience for them.
Now, so many people in our society just deal with general anxiety as well as depression. So as you said, this fear that may present as a fear of public speaking can really show up as fears of all kinds of things. I know as a medical intuitive healer, you would not believe the long list of fears that I have. Fears of men, marriage, German, as we said, death, dating, the opposite sex, even having sex.
Right.
You know,
Right.
the fear of eating the wrong food, fear of not fitting in, all these fears.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why is it worth our time to find ways to deal with our fear of public speaking?
Yeah, well, in terms of this one, I mean, presentations in general, whether they be formal in nature or informal in nature, are not going away, right? We as humans, we're a social species. We're always communicating. We need to communicate, our ideas, our needs, our wants. So if we're looking at the professional sphere and we have our, particular, milestones in our career or within our business that we want to hit or we want to achieve, if we're unable to effectively communicate what those things are to other people, chances are we're not going to hit those milestones. We're not going to be able to make them, because in my experiences, at least, there's only so much one person can do, right? We usually have to work with others to achieve a particular dream, a particular, goal. So again, if we can't effectively communicate what those things are, then how can we expect others to magically read our minds and put us in a position whereby we're going to be able to achieve? So acknowledging this idea that presentations are interspersed within our lives, again, personal and professional, we really need to find ways of dealing with the anxiety that could be derailing our efforts of succeeding ultimately. So finding ways to deal with public speaking stress is absolutely essential, I feel. Yeah.
Now, if you think about it, many of our listeners say, they go, well, I'm never going to be a famous person, or I'm never going to want to give a public speech. And yet we do public speaking all the time, beginning with being in grade school. You've got to stand in front of the class and give your oral report, right?
That's right. Yeah. I still have those memories myself. Yeah.
And still have those memories. And I'm a yoga teacher of 23 years standing, and I have to stand up in front of a group of people, small or large, several times a week, and speak to them and get them to move in ways that maybe they've never moved before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So public speaking is really an integral part of, everyday life for most of us, right?
It is. That's exactly it, Catherine. And I think, like a lot of people, when they think of it, when they think of public speaking, they think of maybe some of those childhood memories, perhaps. But it extends so much further and beyond that. Again, it can be relating to your professional life, whether it's an internal meeting that you've got, a Monday morning sales meeting, or it's a meeting that you have with clients if you're going to do a sales type of presentation. Or if it's within your industry, you're going to a conference and you're speaking to people who could be interested in your idea. I mean, that's certainly on the formal side. But then you have that informal side, as you were just noting, whether it's maybe you're coaching or you're teaching others yoga or a particular skill that's falling outside that realm of the professional, perhaps, a hobby, maybe even, or even sometimes, you're, dare I say, like even delivering a eulogy for somebody who you really care about. Like those are all different examples of public speaking. And as we've already noted, I mean, they cut across so many different areas or spheres of one's life that it really does, we all stand to benefit from finding ways to deal with the stresses that are associated with this act of expressing yourself.
Or even for many people, going to a party and there's a lot of people there, and you're speaking to more than one person at a time.
Yeah.
Now, Chris Schoenwald, what is the science behind fear?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question as well. Basically, whenever we're encountering any frightful situation, our brain is jumping into action, right? And what happens is the neurons begin to fire. They're directing orders to the rest of our body, and how to respond to a particular situation. Our brain is interpreting this as, either A, something that we can handle, or B, something that we probably want to avoid at all costs. And the problem with this is that sometimes our brain and the way it interprets certain situations isn't always accurate, I guess is a good way of putting it. So for example, if we have a presentation coming up, or you've got a keynote you're going to be delivering, and then you can feel the nerves coming on, sometimes for some people, it might set off a system or set off a set of reactions in our system that would equate this speaking opportunity or this presentation as comparable to something like a raging bull staring us down, right? And physiologically speaking, what our brain is going to do is going to prepare us to handle that situation in the way it sees fit, right? So if we have this bull staring us down, we probably want to get into a heightened state. We want our muscles to tense up a little bit. We want that adrenaline coursing through our bodies to get ready for whatever is going to happen, right? And in that scenario, typically it's a fight or flight response system that has been activated.
Yeah.
And again, this is great when you've got an extreme situation. The problem arises when we don't have that raging bull sitting there. It's simply a presentation that we need to give. Because some of the side effects of this fight or flight system, auto response system, is that we almost lose control of some of the physiological responses that our body produces. The perspiration starts, the clammy hands, things like this, and we can't necessarily stop. Well, we can, but it takes time, basically. It's going to take some time to calm back down. And some of the byproducts of this is we lose our ability to concentrate, to function effectively, especially when it's relating to a presentation. If you're trying to remember certain lines, certain ideas, if you're trying to find ways to serve the audience, right? All of those things are going to take a backseat to your body figuring out whether or not you want to get out of there or how you're going to fight your way out, right? So that's typically what's happening for some people if they get worked up so far. This autopilot system of fight or flight begins to take effect, and it's readying our body to do something drastic. But we don't necessarily want that to happen when it's a simple presentation that we've got to give. So it's valuable to know this information, I think, because again, knowledge is power in just about anything and everything, right?
Yeah.
So if we can feel this coming on, we can head this off. We can stop our mind from reacting in such ways that it's going to lead us down this path where we're completely amped up. We can start to initiate our own responses to the system, things like breathing, or again, probably some other techniques that we're going to get into in this interview. But we can take control. We can wrestle the controls away from our brain for a moment there, just to keep ourselves on track.
Now, from my perspective as a medical intuitive healer, I can explain fear from a physiological perspective, because what literally happens is what's called an amygdala hijacking. So inside your brain, you have two little organs. They look like little footballs, and they're very tiny. If you go above your ears about 2 inches and about 2 inches into the brain, these are your amygdalae, and you have two of them. And when information comes into the brain, it goes first to the amygdalae. And when you feel calm and safe, the amygdalae send the signals to the frontal lobes where you can think logically, you produce your own calming neurotransmitters. And when you don't feel safe, the amygdala send the information to the back of the brain, the reptilian brain, where you're simply reacting. So this is the fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain. And the problem with an amygdala hijacking is when this happens, you may have prepared really well for your speech, but you're not able to remember, you're not able to access your higher reasoning, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's exactly it. Yeah. So I completely hear you on that one. And that's what exactly gets a lot of people, unfortunately, for presentations, is they lose, as I was speaking about, they lose control, basically, of their ability to, to dictate the course of how that presentation is going to go. Because once those things kick in the back of the brain, as you're mentioning, it's very, very difficult, for us to regain control in a short amount of time. Typically, it's going to take some time for us to, to work that adrenaline out of our system, to calm ourselves down. And when you've got a major presentation coming up, typically, you don't have a lot of time if you're about to go on stage and present. So
Yeah. And
Yeah,
cortisol, the stress,
it can be a major issue.
and this cortisol, the stress hormone, has a 6-hour half-life. So basically what that means is that when you start to get stressed and you go
Yeah,
into your amygdala, it can take you quite some time, like Chris Schoenwald says, to calm down. Now,
yeah.
Chris Schoenwald, why does it pay for us to understand this information about what happens in our body when we become fearful?
Yeah, yeah. It's to the point we're just speaking about, I guess, is that knowledge is power. I mean, if we're aware of what's happening, or if we know that we're susceptible to some of these things, that, you know, maybe it's from previous experiences, you know, we've had a bout of, you know, severe anxiety, we can take steps to head things off before they ever reach that point, basically. So, you know, maybe that means us initiating a different response to this. You know, we can start to employ a different tactic or technique that allows us to calm down before we ever reach that point of no return. You know, so maybe we start, you know, a breathing technique that we know has been effective for us in the past, or maybe we begin, you know, doing some light or brisk exercise if the time and occasion allows for it. The point is we can begin to do things that are going to help us, you know, or stave off this feeling of severe anxiety. And that's really what it boils down to, I think, is having that ability to control, you know, your physiological and mental responses to some particular stimuli, like your presentation.
Now, Chris Schoenwald, what would be a good starting point as far as addressing the fear of public speaking?
Yeah, well, from my experience and from a lot of research out there, there's three different types of anxiety that most people fall prey to. And we all stand to benefit knowing what it is that gets us. And of these three, maybe we might experience all of them, but as I said earlier, typically it's one that's going to dominate. So let me tell you what the three are. The first one is called situation-based anxiety. And just as it sounds, you know, it's the specific situation, which is what's creating the stress for you. So for example, maybe you're chatting with some of your friends at a cafe, you know, and you're talking about your latest proposal. Okay. The content itself of what you're going to be speaking about in this proposal, no problem. It's a breeze for you. That situation, it's highly relaxing. You're surrounded by people you know and are comfortable with. So you have no problems. But imagine I come and I pluck you out of this cafe and I drop you into a room. Maybe it's within your company or your business, or maybe it's at a conference. And suddenly you've got technology surrounding you. You've got screens, you've got your computer, you've got this audience that's waiting for you. You've got this big, overwhelming situation, which is triggering a lot of these stresses that we were just speaking of. So it's the actual situation. It's not the content that's unnerving you. Even in this, you know, hypothetical situation at a conference, perhaps, you know the content, but it's everything else around you that's setting off these alarm bells, or these anxiety alarm bells. That'd be one type, situation-based anxiety. Another type is called audience-based anxiety. And again, as it sounds, this anxiety is derived from the people that you're actually presenting with. So if we can return back to my first example of you sitting in a cafe with your friends, again, these are people that you know, right? You're about to talk about your latest proposal or whatever it might be, and you're fine, no problems at all. But if we replace your friends and we substitute in maybe work colleagues or your bosses or just people you don't know at all, right? That unknown essentially becomes the problem. Who these people are sets off the anxiety. And the last one is called goal-based anxiety. And this one, of course, again, as it sounds, is centered on the actual goal. So if, for example, maybe you're about to do a sales call or a sales presentation, and you're chatting with the people you're going to be presenting with. And you're chatting maybe about the weather or sports or politics or whatever it might be. None of those things are upsetting you. In fact, those people aren't upsetting you in the least. But the moment you shift into the actual formalized portion of the meeting, which is the presentation, and you know your end goal personally is to try to get that sale, that unto itself is what gets your anxiety up. Okay. So those are the three types. And again, a lot of us will suffer from a little bit of each, but from my experience and from various studies, it's usually, for most of us, is centered on one dominant type of anxiety. So yeah, it's certainly something to keep in mind when we're trying to find ways of dealing, with anxiety or personal anxieties.
Now, Chris Schoenwald, why does it help us to know which type of anxiety that we're susceptible to?
Yeah, yeah. Well, in terms of that, I mean, if we're aware, for example, if it's situation-based anxiety, if that's what's setting us off, well, we can begin to take steps ahead of time, right? So maybe you've got a conference that's lined up, and we know, or that this is something that's upsetting to you, the unknown of what's about to transpire. Well, you can take steps in terms of maybe contacting conference organizers, finding out about the types of people that will be there, the type of technology that is going to be required on your end, whether it's simple things like adapters that you need or software that you need to be prepared for, the layout of the stage or the room, basically checking off all of these things that would normally upset you if you were just walking in blindly. Okay, so that'd be one thing to do, at least for situation-based anxiety. Audience-based anxiety, again, the same principle here. We're trying to find out as much as we can in advance about the people we're going to be presenting to. What are their expectations for our talk? What can you do to please them? What can you do to make this a better experience for them? How can you serve their needs? And oftentimes, as a presenter, if you can begin to focus on how you can help your audience, the pressure is taken off you. You don't need to focus on yourself so much, but you focus on their needs. And that is a great way of flipping things around, where you can begin to focus on that being your goal. And that helps a lot of people as far as lowering their level of anxiety. So that would be one thing you could do. As far as goal-based anxiety, again, same sort of things. We can find ways to deal with this potential problem before it gets out of hand. So maybe you've got this important sales call, or maybe you've got this big industry conference talk or a keynote that you're charged with delivering. Maybe you sign up for some online courses. Maybe you get a coach yourself to help you along that process to ensure, or at least increase the odds that you're going to produce a successful outcome. So, if we can narrow down what it is that's upsetting us, we can begin to take steps towards finding solutions. The problem is a lot of us, don't take that time, and we just get completely overwhelmed by the situation. And as a result, what we produce, typically can be something that's less than desirable. So knowledge is power, Catherine, as you know, right? Knowledge is power.
Yeah, I know for myself, when I started teaching yoga, at first I would get up in front of the room and I'd be like, oh my God, everybody's looking at me. And then I realized, and then, I was all worried about how am I coming across, etc. And then I realized they're not worried about what I look like. They're all worried about what they look like.
That's right. That's right.
So then I just shifted to just helping people. And as you said, that shift to just simply focusing on helping others and serving others.
Yeah.
And it takes all the focus off of me, and it focuses on, how can I best serve these people who are in front of me? And that helped a lot. Now, Chris,
that's right.
How long have you been coaching people to overcome their fears of public speaking?
Well, I've been involved with presentations myself, for at least 10, 15 years now. Some of my experiences have cut across, education, within private enterprise, working for different organizations, and then also some of my own ventures as well. So presentations have been something that I've been involved with for a number of years, whether that's, giving them myself, or whether that's been working with people and helping them, get the skills that are required to effectively do so. So yeah, I've been doing this for quite some time.
So we talked about the three most common fears: situational fears, fears of the audience, and then goal-based fears. And your experience in coaching people about public speaking, what's the most common fear? Or is there a most common fear?
Yeah, it's a nice question. And, I've been asked this question before, and it's a really difficult one. Truthfully, I don't know if there is one in particular. I think, I've encountered people, like several people in each of those categories. I think we're all different, and, we have different things that set us off. So I don't know. Truthfully, I probably wouldn't be able to give you a defined, response to that. I think, and we're all different, and all three of them are very, very common.
Okay, so let's talk about some natural healing remedies for handling this fear, for handling this anxiety, so that we can do better in public speaking, whether we're speaking at a party or we're helping to coach our child when they're going to get up to give a talk in school, or whether we're going to make a presentation to our boss, or when we're actually giving a public speech. What are some of the good things that you know about to help us handle this pressure?
Sure. Probably the first one that I would definitely draw people's attention towards is something that you and your listeners, I'm certain, would be well aware of. And it's this notion, or this practice of mindfulness, a form of meditation. It's basically taken the world by storm in the last 5 years. And for those who aren't really familiar with it, again, it's a form of meditation. And there's a quote that I really like by a New York Times bestselling author, Dan Harris, who actually wrote a book on mindfulness. And he said that mindfulness is the act of knowing what's going on in your head without getting carried away with it in any particular moment. And I thought that was just perfectly encapsulates, what this technique is all about and what happens for a lot of people, right? As again, we've spoken in this interview, we've got these disempowering thoughts that are, trickling their way or charging their way into our minds. Usually what happens is they don't just stay there and remain small. They grow. They get bigger and bigger, through the combination of other fears and worries. And all of this amounts to basically us leading up to a state of maybe that fear or fight or flight response system being enacted. So one of the techniques that I think is an excellent way of us being able to take control is mindfulness. It's basically mindfulness, as it says, is as a way for us to recognize what's happening in our mind. And then letting these disempowering thoughts either just freely come in and come out, or again, allowing us to take control and set off a different set of responses that will help us deal with the situation. So most definitely, mindfulness would be one technique I would recommend people to research a little bit more on if they're unfamiliar with it.
And in the case of public speaking, that would simply be a matter of paying attention to the thoughts that are going on in your mind, right? And becoming the observer, right?
That's exactly it. Knowing that, yes, it's perfectly acceptable and it's normal. Again, that stat, 75% of people suffer from speech anxiety. This is normal. What am I experiencing right now? But, is it a rational sort of fear right now? If I prepared and I know I'm aware of what I'm about to say, is this response that I'm working myself up to right now, is it right? Or is it something that I'm just getting carried away with right now? Maybe it's something that I can do right now to head this off, take a walk, do some, brisk exercise, or whatever it might be.
So from my perspective as a medical intuitive healer, this would be literally your soul or spirit observing your ego mind, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, oh, now she or he is thinking this or that. Now he or she is feeling this or that, as opposed to allowing the thoughts and feelings to run the show.
Yeah. No, that's precisely it. So definitely.
If you let your ego run the show, you're going to be in trouble sooner or later.
That's for sure. So that would definitely be one thing, mindfulness. Another technique I find really effective for a number of people is this notion of visualization. And visualization, there's been tons and tons of studies like mindfulness to show that, or to prove that its efficacy in helping people, handle difficult situations. And as visualization relates to public speaking, it isn't necessarily like you standing in a corner and practicing word for word what you're going to be saying. although that you could potentially do that. That's not what I mean by visualization. Visualization to me in relating to presentations is more of you seeing yourself from afar, perhaps, deliver the presentation and deliver results and responses in the way that you want people to see it or view it or, process it. So if you're giving a talk and your goal is to boost morale, right? You're seeing people in the audience, physically becoming maybe excited by your talk or giving you cues that, yes, is something they agree with, the simple nodding of their head, whatnot. So you see all of these things, and the power in doing that is that you're actually laying the foundation for you yourself to be able to achieve those types of results. You're allowing yourself to.
Yeah. So we're allowing ourselves to actually see ourselves being successful and creating results with the people that we're speaking to, right? So
yeah, that's exactly it. It's a very powerful technique. And it's one other thing I'd like to add with it, and this is a bit of a cautionary tale as well, is that it is that powerful that it can also go the other way if we're not careful. So if we, subconsciously are running a script through our mind of things going the wrong way, let's say you're rehearsing for this presentation and you're flubbing one particular part of the presentation or one line maybe, and you keep running that through your mind subconsciously, well, what you're doing is you're paving in that pathway for that mistake to happen again when it's the real deal. So you have to be careful with it as well. It can be used as a really great, powerful tool for you in a number of respects. But if we're not aware of what's going on, some of these disempowering thoughts or negative thoughts can also, show themselves through this process of visualization. So.
And I know that visualization has been used by athletes, and they found that by visualizing yourself, say, throwing the ball through the basket, that's equally effective as actually doing the physical practice.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. Like our brain doesn't exactly distinguish between what's going on in the here and now to what could happen down the tracks within a day, a week, or a month. Right? We can work ourselves up into that moment where we're fooling our system that, yes, this is occurring right now, when in actuality, it's not. So if we can kind of practice that over and over again, we're basically setting ourselves up for that potential success or failure, more or less, right? So visualization is a really, really powerful technique. And again, there's been a mound of evidence that's been, around it as well, within a number of different spheres, not just public speaking, as you mentioned, sports and other high performance type activities. It's a great tool for anyone to have at their disposal. So that would be something else. I'd like to add.
Yeah. So visualization, paying attention to our thoughts, practicing mindfulness. And you have another technique also that you're sharing with our audience?
Yeah, and this is a really simple one as well. It's just this notion of smiling. And again, there's been a lot of studies done on smiling, on why it's a good thing to do. It reduces your stress. It actually makes you look more intelligent, more approachable, more credible, more trustworthy. All great things, all great impressions to be making when you're trying to, persuade someone, or you're trying to shift them to your way of thinking in some manner, which is what we're always doing within a presentation, right? You have a certain call to action. You have a message that you want to get across to an audience. You need people to buy in to you as a whole, not just your message, right? Your message alone is not going to be enough. So there has to be, these other parts of you, whether it's your gestures, whether it be, just your personality shining through, that allows people to believe in you. And smiling is a really great technique for that, I find. I mean, even just if you think about it in the sense of like walking down the street or with a stranger in a store, if you smile at someone, what is their typical response? In most cases, they're going to return that back. It's reciprocal, right? So again, if you're giving a presentation and, maybe there's a particular moment which allows for a natural smile, for you to to emit to an audience, and if you can get that type of reaction back, that's a connection that's been established between you and an audience. And especially for public speaking or any type of presentation, establishing that connection is absolutely essential. So yeah, smiling is a nice technique because it accomplishes so many different, positive outcomes for people that I would highly, highly recommend people, find ways to integrate that into their presentation, whether it's even before you even get on stage and you're doing a little meet and greet with some of your audience members, or post presentation. It just helps make the whole thing that much more humanized, I guess. So, yeah.
Now, Chris Schoenwald, when you're talking about this connection, are you talking about a mind-to-mind connection, a heart-to-heart connection? What kind of connection do we really want to have when we're public speaking?
Yeah, all of them, both of them, basically. I mean, you definitely want people to be considering your ideas, right, in a positive manner. If, again, when you're giving any type of talk, it's my belief that you're trying to change the world in some way, whether it be small or whether it be large. You're trying to get them to buy into your thinking. And in order for that to happen, you have to have some sort of connection, whether it be on a spiritual level, whether it be on a more rational, logical level. You need both areas to be, established. And oftentimes when we're encountered with new ideas that, maybe we haven't heard before, or maybe we're somewhat against, we put our walls up, right? We put this wall up that, I've already got a bunch of ideas. I'm too busy to really think this through. I've got too many other things on my plate. We naturally, as audiences, put up this wall. And some of the ways to chip away at that wall as a presenter are to establish relationships, personal relationships with these people. And we can do that while we're speaking, right? If we're, for example, using this technique, we're smiling at appropriate times and we're creating this emotional connection, maybe the audience looks at us in a different respect, irregardless of our message, maybe. But, this is a nice person. That's a nice guy. Maybe that's something that allows them to bring that wall down. Okay, maybe I'll give them a little bit more time, or I'll give her a little bit more time to, to try to convince me, try to sway me. And these little things are really, really important to, again, establishing this connection on, on an emotional level, but then also on this, level of, logical, rational thought as well to the ideas. So yeah, I think both are of critical importance.
Now, Chris, let's talk about it from a qualitative perspective, because when I think of the best speakers that I've heard in my lifetime, what I notice is they literally project their energy, their personal energy, their chi, their prana, whatever you would like to call it. They project their personal energy to everyone in the room. And so how can we do this most effectively to project our energy to everyone?
Yeah, and there's several things I think that would go into this. And one of them, is, first off, is just knowing your content.
So knowing our content really well. So we can hold the energy. So we're not just speaking about something, we're holding the energy. Is that what you're saying? So by holding the energy, we can share it better.
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. I think also as well, like if we're struggling to come up with the right words, or we don't know what our end goal is in our talk, it's really hard for us to concentrate on some of the other things that are going to help us emit energy to an audience. If we're struggling to remember what our next line is or what our next point is, we can't necessarily pick up on some of the audience clues of things that are resonating with them. And the best speakers, they know their content inside out because they've rehearsed it several times over. So they're able to focus on other things. Again, like maybe it's somebody who, smiles, or they pick up on a slight little grin. Well, that speaker will use that information the next time around, touch on that point that created that moment, and maybe amplify it even further, or take it one step further. And other times as well, maybe they notice someone who's, about to pull out their phone. So that speaker knows that they're losing the audience. They know that they have to maybe, amp up their own presentation style. Maybe that means fiddling around or changing their voice a little bit more, laying some more stress on a particular word, or maybe it's slowing things down, right? Inserting some pauses around some of the most important messages or points that they've raised. So they can begin to use different techniques. And this vocal variety is one, or maybe it's some of their gestures and movements. I find that some of the most effective speakers, when they're engaged in telling a story, they'll get you to the point where they bring you along on that journey as well. And they make you feel what they're feeling, what they see. And that's incredibly powerful as well. So, if you're struggling to remember what you're going to say, or you're giving a story without any emotion, you're not, giving a holistic approach, I guess, or you're not emitting a holistic approach as far as all of your content and your message, your voice, your actions, all of these things, you're not going to be emitting energy in such a way that's going to resonate with people. So putting it all together is really important. And if you're only focusing on one of these different areas, it's not going to be enough. A complete speaker has all of these areas covered, essentially. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, Chris Schoenwald, what about some of the physical solutions to ease stress? I mean, if you're about to give a speech, you can't suddenly go for a 5-mile run or drop to the floor and do 30 minutes of yoga, unless you've got 30 minutes before you give your talk, right?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. I mean, again, in this notion of knowledge is power, and if you know that you're susceptible to anxiety when it comes to public speaking, maybe you do find ways of incorporating some physicality into your routine. Maybe it doesn't mean a 5-mile run necessarily, or maybe it does if you're able to schedule that in on that day. But excuse me, from my experience, any type of physicality, even as little as 5 minutes, has been shown to produce results. It allows us to reduce, or to our body to produce endorphins, the feel-good, hormones, basically. So I know people that'll sometimes do a quick set of push-ups, or maybe it's a 5-10 minute walk or something, or they just do some sort of brisk activity for a short, intense amount of time just before, to kind of burn off some of that excess adrenaline that could have potentially built up or is building up. So, small, simple things are, can be really effective. Other times you've got time, say a week in advance, a couple weeks in advance, you can begin to do things like progressive muscle relaxation. Are you familiar with that, Catherine?
Absolutely, yes. We
Yeah,
do that in yoga class at the end, where you basically tense and relax your muscles.
Yeah.
Part of what you're doing is you're training your nervous system and your muscles literally to learn how to relax, because some people are so chronically locked down in stress, they're not able to relax.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah,
what about foods or drinks to be aware of that may trigger stress?
Yeah, for sure. And this is an important one as well. This is one that gets me, because I love coffee. But unfortunately, anything with high doses of caffeine, as you can probably well imagine, right before a presentation, not going to be in your best interest to be downing. So that energy drink, that Red Bull, that double latte from Starbucks, whatnot, it's going to set off. It's going to give a spike of adrenaline, or sorry, a spike of caffeine, which is going to set off a bunch of physiological responses. And caffeine, again, this show, you and your listeners would be well aware, it makes us jittery. It makes us a little less natural, I guess you could say, in maybe, how you might speak, increases the pace at which we deliver information. So, caffeine, I would avoid, at least, anytime relatively close to your presentation time. I think I was reading once that caffeine stays within your system for 5 to 6 hours, I think, for a regular cup of coffee.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you really don't want to drink caffeine after 4 o'clock at night, because it can keep you awake.
Yeah.
Chris Schoenwald, final.
Yeah, and even for people. Sure.
Chris Schoenwald, final thoughts for our audience. What's the big takeaway that you want our folks to remember?
Yeah, yeah. I guess as a whole, I mean, managing this aspect of fear or anxiety surrounding public speaking, I mean, it's something that's real and affects a lot of people. And I believe as well, we've talked about in this interview, that a lot of our success in life, whether it be personal, our personal relationships, or our professional, will invariably be linked up to this notion of effective communication skills. So we all stand to benefit by regaining control over this aspect of our lives. And if we're able to do so, we really stand to benefit in improved relationships, in us being able to position ourselves for success, to be able to hit personal or professional milestones. So I don't think this something that we ought to be just winging and think, oh, I'm just going to get through these presentations. I can survive. I don't like it, but I'll get through it. Why do that when we can potentially excel? We can take this further, and we can, join that crowd of people that actually are good at this and able to make a lasting difference for ourselves and others. So that would be my message.
You've been listening to Chris Schoenwald, the Passion Fashion presenter. You can find out more about Chris Schoenwald and his wonderful work at www.passionfp.com. My name is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author, host of the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. And remember, when you conquer your fear, not only do you speak more clearly and more effectively in all of your public presentations, but you also heal yourself naturally. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.